All right, so to move us along, I'm going to introduce Carrie Ann if you want to come and tell us who our next presenter is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. So I'm really excited to present our next person whose name is Elaine Dolalas. Elaine uses the she and her pronouns and is a student affairs professional who resides in San Fernando Valley. However, Historic Filipinotown is forever in the heart of this writer, producer, and podcast with This Filipino American Life. A Virgo Sun, Libra Moon, and Scorpio Rising, Elaine is happily trying to figure out the secret of life through writing, volunteering, and most importantly, avoiding cleaning her room, much to her husband and podcast producer, Mike chagrin. Today, Elaine's going to be presenting on This Filipino American Life, How a Magic Mike and Four Friends Combat Erasure.
Thank you so much. I've never heard somebody read that, and that just brings me so much joy that you did the whole Virgo, and I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Let me share my screen. So welcome to This Filipino American Life, How a Magic Mike and Four Friends Combat Erasure. My name is Elaine Dolalas, and I will be sharing our podcast journey and our thoughts on what kind of ancestors we want to be. So what happens when a newly minted PhD graduate, a public servant, a student affairs professional, and a nonprofit foundation's programs manager come together to talk story? You get This Filipino American Life, a podcast that explores the nuanced experiences of Filipinos in the United States. At iba pa. The origin story of TFALpodcast stems from the four of us being based in Los Angeles with a history of community organizing work. And many times we would have personal conversations that would end with, that should be a podcast. And in turn, the should became a could, which is now our reality. So I actually asked the team the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? So the following slides are going to showcase that as I share our journey. So at the creation of TFALpodcast, Joe Bernardo was the newly minted PhD graduate. He realized that pursuing academia wasn't their passion any longer. So they were like, I'm done. I don't want to pursue a tenure track. What do I do now? And instead, he has now since transitioned to an administrative role at a private university. And TFALpodcast was his brainchild. He would have conversations with his friend and coworker, Ryan Carpio. So Ryan Carpio and Joe Bernardo were coworkers when they both worked for the mayor's office for the city of Los Angeles. Their conversations at work were the inspiration for what would be TFALpodcast. Ryan is also someone I have personally known since I was in high school. So our friendship and chemistry comes through with our easy conversations throughout the show. So how did I get involved? So prior to TFAL, I actually had two other podcasts in the past. One was where I would recap Babysitters Club books, yes, the YA series from the 80s, 90s, and reread them and talk about them. And the other was an oral history project where I recounted stories about my Lola, my grandmother. I had the podcast background, and Joe and Ryan knew that, so they approached me with the idea of TFAL. I loved it and absolutely said yes, like immediately. And I just so happened to be married to someone whose nickname in college was Radio Shack, since they were an electronics hoarder. So it was perfect because we already had the equipment needed to record and host a podcast. And that is how Mike became involved with TFAL. While he likes to remain behind the scenes, producer Mike, as he's affectionately called on our show, and is known to our audience as such, drops some of the best insight when we have our conversations. Our podcast journey goes beyond conversations between the four of us. Through our network and sheer will combined with cold calls, we've had conversations with guests that range from Nobel Peace Prize winners Maria Ressa, death doulas like Michelle Mondia, national data statisticians like Neil Ruiz, filmmaker Isabel Sandoval, academics like Mark Villegas. These episodes continue the oral history tradition of our lolas and lolos while also challenging cultural norms that we may or may not agree with. Feedback received has equated the podcast to feeling like listening to cousins talk at a family party. We are like everyone's ates and kuyas, manangs or manangs, or because we're getting on in age, titas and titos. We are fully acknowledge this. So we share our stories, infusing humor, occasional singing. We are Filipino. It's a magic mic. Karaoke is going to come into play, and learning something along the way. TFALpodcast creates an inclusive community of Filipino and Filipino Americans, which showcases that we are not a monolith. Each episode released reveals more and more of the diaspora of experiences we share. We create a record of our stories on our own terms, innovating our own platform, paying homage to the ancestors before us, and paving a way for the future generations to create new lanes for themselves. Thank you for allowing me the ability to pay tribute to a few of our ancestors with this slide. This slide is very meaningful to me. It has family that we've lost along the way, student affairs professionals who were mentors, and people who were just guiding lights in our community and guided us as a community organizers. So I just wanted to give them their flowers and commemorate them. So yeah, that's them. And so I'm the emotional one on the podcast. I always cry. So this is my moment to shine because this is perfect. And you can find us at thisfilipinoamericanlife.com, listen on Spotify, Apple, wherever you go find podcasts. This is our Instagram at TFALpodcast, and Facebook, we're at This Filipino American Life. Daghang salamat to you all. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share this journey with you. I feel so blessed and honored to be have this audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elaine, for sharing your story and letting us know more about the podcast. It was beautiful to hear about how you acknowledge members of the community who have passed on. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. We do have some time to take a question from the audience. So similar to the last time, if you want to write your question in the chat, we're happy to read that out loud, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question out loud. All right, so we do have a question coming in the chat. Who is your dream Filipino guest?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I would love to talk to Lea Salonga because she's like my queen and hero. But also Joey Santiago, the guitarist from the Pixies, just because like that would be amazing. And then I have on the horizons somebody who I would love to get is Melissa from Real World New Orleans, because she's also like going to be on the new season. So if we could make that happen, that would be amazing. Like, yeah, anyone and everyone. I just love it. And like my favorite new guest would be like someone whose story like hasn't been told yet. Like if there's somebody who has a story in the middle of nowhere and then they've done something like really cool for the community, I would love to like talk to them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elaine. And hopefully we have some connections in the community to make this all happen. Next, I'm going to be passing it over to Dirk.
Let's do a quick shout out for Elaine. Everybody unmute and give her a cheer. Congrats, Elaine.
Yay.